Hello everyone. I'm Harry from the Love, Death and Movies podcast, and I'm joined today by the writer and director of the new Australian white knuckle thriller, The Cost, Matthew Holmes. Firstly, Matthew, thank you for your time today. It's a pleasure. Secondly, what a great movie you've made here. I've been singing its praises to everyone I know since I've seen it across my
Awesome.
content and in person. But welcome to Love, Death and Movies.
Oh, thanks, mate. It's great to be on. It's great to be here, and I appreciate you spreading the good word and getting the movie out there for us. I think word of mouth is going to be the strongest card we have. So let's hope you and others are doing. That it's starting to spread.
Absolutely. Well, to give a quick summary of this film for the people that haven't seen it yet, the film centers around the fallout of the assault and killing of Stephanie. This happens in the past, and the man that did it has been caught, convicted for 30 years, sent to jail, but is released after 10 years on parole. And the film picks up there, focuses on the brother of Stephanie and the husband of Stephanie with their ambition to kidnap this man, torture him, and kill him. For me, Matthew, like because I feel like film can be seen in multiple different ways. That this film focuses on two facets for me: the realism of revenge and consequences, and that can be seen through a multitude of different ways throughout the film. Well, firstly, where did this idea come from?
Where did the I? Oh, look, it came from a number of places, and it was motivated by a number of different things. But really, the idea first came from a newspaper article that I read about a man who had lost his daughter to someone who had murdered her, and that person was getting released early. So I thought it immediately just made me feel a lot of empathy for that man, and I thought, gee, I wonder if that man is going to try to, now that the guy's out of prison, do you think he'll ever hunt him down? And if he did, what would he do to him? And I thought that was just an interesting idea for a film potentially. So I just put it in the back of my mind. And then years later, when I was trying to come up with a very simple sort of 3 or 4 hander film that I could shoot very, very cheaply and with some good friends of mine, well, I was looking for an idea and I just came back to that. I was also quite affected by some high profile murders that happened here uh, in Melbourne over the last decade since I've been living here that very greatly sort of shook the Melbourne community, and there was a lot of outrage naturally about those. So I sort of drew on those sort of real life things, and then mingled it with, I guess, my own feelings of desires and that I have when I hear about injustice, but also about what I hear. Like I always hear in social media and threads and in just general conversation, you always have people say this is what they should do to people who commit terrible crimes, and sometimes it's quite violent. And I think it's interesting that even regular people think this way. So I thought that's sort of, I guess, the genesis of it. But when Greg and I started writing it, we really wanted to do a revenge film that hadn't really been done before. Revenge is so often presented as a noble or cathartic act, and we wanted to look at it through a lens that really was very, very realistic. These guys aren't ex SAS or ex policemen or ex special service agents like Liam Neeson. These guys are just, one's a plumber and one's a software engineer, and they're doing something they've fantasized about, which seems very, understandable. And we wanted to look at it very, very realistically, and to see that, once you've pulled the trigger or once you've done what it is that you want to do, is it really going to be the fantasy? Is it really going to fix that hole in you that you think revenge is going to fix?
Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, you touched on realism of revenge. For me, that's one of the ways this film shines because you think of revenge in movies and it's very Hollywoodized. You think of John Wick mowing down thousands of people because his dog gets killed,
Yeah.
rightfully so. But what this film does is that it really grounds what revenge really looks like in the real world. Yeah, was that something really important for you to include from the get go?
Yeah, that was very much part of our earliest conversations. Was we want to take people on a ride that's different to other revenge films, where you look at the humanity of it, and you look at the vile and the violence, and you have and to be confronted with it. In movies, it's, these characters, they shoot somebody and then they walk away, and it's almost like, like, what's for breakfast? There's no consequence. There's no humanity to any of it, and and the villains are always painted in such broad and evil terms that we accept the violence. But I thought, well, what if the person that you have built up in your mind as evil, like the character of Troy, what if when faced with him, you suddenly realize that, well, number one, he's just a human, and number two, what if there's a lingering question that perhaps he isn't evil? Maybe he is sorry. Maybe he's repentant. Maybe he was misguided. Maybe, but then again, maybe he's lying. So I just thought, it's much more interesting to play in the gray than it is to play in the black and white world.
Hell yeah.
So that's what we that was always our intention.
Hell yeah. Well, this was correct me if I'm wrong. This was made during the height of lockdown. Where people that don't know, lockdown season during the COVID era in Australia was gnarly, where every state kind of acted on their own accord. Different states locked everyone down separately. I could imagine making anything was impossible, let alone a film. So can you tell me about how difficult it was to make a film under those conditions? Because was it made in 14 months?
Yeah, it was. It was shot over about 13 months.
That's nuts.
Yeah, so it was. We started in February of 2021. We started filming. I actually had written it a while earlier, but again, lockdowns meant we couldn't start. And then we finally got to start in February 21, and then we got locked down again after we'd shot a certain amount of the movie, and then we got started doing a bit more. Then we got locked down again, and then even when we did get when we did finally pick up for our last bit of filming towards the end of 21, we were still dealing with crew members that suddenly couldn't turn up because they tested positive and had to isolate, and it was just all over the place. And it was very tricky. But what it did do is that it gave us time to cut pieces of the movie together that we had shot and start playing with it in the edit. And suddenly we would find things that maybe we could do a bit better, scenes that we rewrote and then reshot. And sometimes it gave us some ideas. The movie revealed some holes that needed fixing. So we could, so in one sense, it was a blessing in disguise, because I think we got a stronger film out of it ultimately, but it was a very painful way of making a movie by stopping and starting all the time and maintaining continuity. And unfortunately, we did lose one actor who was a South Australian actor who was going to come over, and he couldn't come over to play his part because he just couldn't get across the border.
Right.
So, yeah, so we had to roll with a lot of punches making it during COVID. I can tell you that, definitely.
That was for the role of Brian, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we had he was sort of a last minute call in, because we just when it was time to start rolling cameras again, the original actor couldn't get over the border, which was a shame. But Clayton did a wonderful job anyway. So
he was fantastic.
Yeah, so it all sort of works out well in the end. And like I said, I think the film's stronger for us having taken our time, but the process of making it was certainly arduous.
For sure. Let's touch on the actors real quickly, because a film of like a small scope film like this kind of lives and dies on the performance of the actors. And I thought the three leads were exceptional. Where did you find them? Because it really felt like this film was written for them.
Yes, well, in many ways it certainly was written for the two leads. I've worked with Jordan Fraser-Trumbull before on The Legend of Ben Hall. We've been friends for a long time and been wanting to make films together. And so I wrote it with him in mind. And I also wrote the character of Aaron for another actor, Damon Hunter, who I had become friends with but hadn't worked with before. And so we really did have them in our mind's eye. So I guess when writing the film, we could, we sort of imagine them and hear their voices. So it was sort of tailor-made for them. And as we said, Brian was a call-in at the last minute. But Kevin was an actor we had to search around for. A few actors that we did offer the role to didn't want to do it because of the intensity of the role and the physical and mental.
It's a tough gig. It's a
gig,
tough one.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but he, having played similar types of characters in the past, he was up to the challenge and gave us an audition that was amazing. So, yeah, I got very, very fortunate with him. And the rest of the cast, you know, all the little walk-in roles, all the little additional characters, were all actors I've either worked with before or I knew, and I just asked them to be in it because I knew they were all, you know, fantastic actors.
Awesome. Well, I asked this during the Q&A of the session that I saw you at in Sydney. But this film gave me so much anxiety. And I think you described it best when you introed the film, that you drive the audience to the cliff continuously, but you'll never drive them off it.
Yeah.
And this really just goes back to me for me of how this film is about consequences, because all of this anxiety-inducing scenes all focus on what happens if it doesn't go their way. Was that your intention, to keep me physically on edge for 2 hours?
Yeah, no, it really was. I mean, we didn't know if we could do it, but it was certainly was. Greg and I did want to make a film that at the end of it, you felt like you were completely strung out. We didn't want to let the audience off the hook at all, just like the characters. We really wanted the audience to feel like the characters. So, you know, it's set in 48 hours. It doesn't really go outside of that except for one little flashback in the middle. But yeah, we wanted to, we sort of we thought of the movie and we spoke of it when we were writing it as as one big rubber band, but lots of little rubber bands in between. So the whole movie was like a big rubber band that we just wanted to keep stretching and stretching and stretching and keep that tension as long as possible before we release it. How long can we go before we release the tension? How long can we stretch it? And within every little scene, we approached every scene like, okay, every scene is a little mini rubber band that we're going to stretch as long as we can and keep that tension. Yeah, and that was just about making sure that every scene and every moment of the film, the stakes were constantly rising higher and higher and higher. So yeah, it's all very much by design, and you know, we're just glad we pulled it off. We didn't know if it was going to work. We didn't know if we could maintain it, but we you know, in theory, we thought we could, so we just went for it.
Yeah, I will. During my session, I messaged you about this, that like the police scene, the pullover scene, that like I still have flashbacks on it. But the guy sitting behind me, this is like one of the things I'll never forget from this year. When that scene finished, I just hear like him like sigh, go, Christ, like, so like we're in for a treat. So you definitely succeeded there, man.
God, that's good. That's good.
You've touched on this already, but one thing that I love what you did is that you didn't overshow the violence.
Yep.
The scenes with Steph, the torture scenes, you continuously, again, you bring us to the cliff, but you don't drive us off. And that's kind of like the Jaws effect, right? Like how in Jaws, you never really, you don't see the shark much, but the idea of it is there, like in this case,
Yeah.
violence. And in your head, the idea of it is much more terrifying than anything that you'd be able to show us. So
Yep.
was that important for you to not step too far into gore? Because you could have easily done that, but you didn't.
Yeah, no, I could have. I don't like gore personally. I'm not into torture porn films or incredible violence. I don't mind if a film has violence, but I feel like it needs to be justified. If it's just there for show, or if it's there for, you know, just to make people, I don't know. I didn't want to create disgust with my film, and I think James Cameron said it best, that you don't create horror with blood and guts and violence. You create disgust, and I didn't want people to be disgusted with the film, but I did want them to feel horrified and a lot of tension by what was happening. But I think what happens is there's enough movies out there that do go to the edge, that do show you really horrible things.
Yeah.
But I think in the audience's mind, they're already anticipating, oh no, this film's going to go there, isn't it? And it nearly does. But again, to keep the audience sort of in sync with the two characters, we didn't go too far because these characters wouldn't naturally go too far. They're not psychopaths. They're just two ordinary guys. And even though they might want to do really violent things, they're ultimately going to be confronted with the reality of having to do it. Whereas if this was Wolf Creek 3, you know, Mick Taylor has no problems in gutting people like a pig. Whereas these guys would have a problem with, they couldn't do it. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't go through with it. So it sort of was a way for the audience to experience the anticipation of it, but never actually have to go through it. And in the case of the scene with Stephanie and things like that, you had to understand the horrificness of his crime in order to get on side with these characters and what they're doing. But we also didn't want to, freak people out as well in the audience. So again, it's just about taking people to the very edge, but not push them off. Otherwise, you lose your audience if you push them off the edge. But taking them to, it's always scariest when you're teetering on the edge. Once you've fallen over and plunging to your death, it's all over. So again, that's about maintaining tension because once you've crossed the line, you probably can't come back from there. The tension's now gone. So
Absolutely. Well, I think that flashback with Steph was kind of perfect. And I think that was perfectly placed as well because not to spoil the film at all. So I'll let the audience, when they watch it, they'll completely realize that it's kind of it's like a reminder scene is how I would describe it. To be like, hey, remember this happened, and then like go back to the present day again. It's like, okay, that's how I saw another thing. It worked perfectly for me because I started to sympathize with Troy for a little bit there.
Well, we found that when we were on a very 6-month lockdown period, and we were editing the movie, and we hadn't shot that scene with Stephanie yet. That flashback was not part of the original script, and we found that everyone we were showing the this half a movie to was just sympathizing with Troy too much, and they couldn't, even though they logically knew what the character had done, because the movie tells you what he has done, because they hadn't experienced it, they couldn't get into they couldn't feel the rage the way these two characters could feel the rage, and therefore their sympathy was completely with the victim, with Troy. So that's when Greg and I reassessed, and we went, you know what, we really need to see the crime. We have to bring the audience back into the minds of these two characters and make the audience understand what they're going through, why they are so angry. And that scene very quickly just writes it again and makes everyone go, this is why they're doing this.
Yeah.
So again, and that just was born out of, being able to play around with the movie as we were going and discover and let the movie tell us what it needed.
Absolutely. Well, let's have one more question for you. We here at Love, Death and Movies, we're 3 film lovers, but we're from 3 different countries. We've got Ash, who's from the United States. We've got Byron from New Zealand, who I still don't believe is a real country. And we've got myself from Australia. I've always been a massive advocate for Australian cinema across all my content. I think it's some of the most raw and beautiful storytelling there is. I'm constantly asked for recommendations. So I wanted to ask you, what are some Australian films that you would recommend to people that aren't well versed in Australian cinema?
Excellent Australian films that aren't well versed in Australian cinema.
Because my opinion is my first sentence whenever someone asks me is, don't start with The Castle.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, look, I like that film, but I don't think it's very popular. And also it's no good to tell foreigners about it because foreigners don't get it.
They won't get it.
It is such a unique film to Australia. The humor would just go over their heads.
Yeah.
Australian cinema that I really, really love. Look, I think the works of Rolf de Heer are really great. I think if people haven't discovered some of the beautiful and wonderful films he's done, like Charlie's Country, 10 Canoes, The Tracker, The Old Man Who Read Love Stories, I think Rolf's work is really, really wonderful. And I think I know he's very acclaimed, but maybe now he's not working so much. I think people he may be a little bit forgotten. And I think his films, I would recommend people check out Rolf de Heer. He's got a wonderful style, and his film's always very unique. So yeah, I'd say any film by Rolf de Heer you're always going to get something out of. So and he was a great help and a mentor to me in my early film career, and I learned a lot from him, and I owe him a lot. So yeah,
that's awesome. Well, thank you, Matthew. You can watch The Cost anytime on Prime Video, Apple TV, Google Play, YouTube Movies. You can also own your own copy from JB Hi-Fi, EzyDVD, or Sanity. I got my copy, but I've also got another copy that I'm going to do a giveaway on our podcast around episode 10, so stay tuned. But Matthew, awesome. Congratulations on a great film. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Thank you for having me on, and yeah, and good luck to whoever gets the free copy of The Cost. Hope you enjoy it.